So love is obviously a really important part of being a Christian. But what does it mean to be a Christian? What is Christian? Anybody? Go ahead. This will be a dialogue for a minute here. I'll ask a follower of Christ. Okay. Anybody else? Anything? Say what? Christ-like. Okay. Anything else? What is Christian? Belief in a resurrection. Okay. Loving others. Yeah. All those things are certainly probably part of it. I want to do something special this morning. We're actually going to consult the all-knowing Google and search, what is Christian? So there we go. 1,510,000,000 results in Google for what is Christian. So we're just going to start with the first link this morning and see how far. No, we're not really going to do that. The thing is, it's really easy, I think, to be Christian. It's really easy to be Christian because Scripture itself, our Bible, our collection of ancient documents that come from the people who walked and talked with Jesus, don't define Christian. So it's really easy to be Christian. We can kind of define it however we want, and we can make it fit our own picture. Back in the first century, the reason Christian wasn't used very much, the reason it wasn't defined for us is because it was actually used by outsiders to describe Jesus' followers. Jesus' followers called themselves followers of the way. If you've ever heard that term, the way, because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So they were followers of the way. Christian was actually a derogatory term used by outsiders to describe these people who tried to make themselves look like this Jesus. They acted like this Jesus guy, this guy that called himself Christ. So they called him Christian, Christ-ian, a little Christ, or Christ-like. And they hated Christ. They hated Jesus. So that was not a good thing to be called a Christian in the eyes of the world. So go back in history with me for a moment. I know not everybody likes a history lesson, but just kind of try and imagine yourself back in history for a moment. Go back to around 64 AD. So we're about 30 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. We're in the middle of the Roman Empire. This little movement of these Christians, these little Christs, has started to kind of take hold, and it's becoming a threat to the government, to people, to the status quo. And so there's this guy in charge named Nero, and he burns the city of Rome. And he needs a scapegoat. He needs somebody to blame it on. And so he finds this little cult, this little group of people following some dude that they claim came back to life, and he blames it on them. And people believe it. And they start persecuting these Christians, these Christians. They start putting bounties on their head. If you can bring one of them to be executed publicly, you'll get paid for it. And they execute them in the most terrible ways. That they burn them at the stake, literally tie them up to a wooden post and start a fire while they're alive. Maybe you are familiar with some of these stories. They fed them to the lions in the gladiatorial ring. They'd go out in the middle of the Colosseum, and they'd allow lions to come in, and the Christians they weren't gladiators. They didn't have any weapons or any way to defend themselves. They just got eaten for the people's entertainment. It was terrible. Imagine knowing your image of Christian today, that you could go back in time to that moment and go out into the city and find a Christian family. Dad's confused. He doesn't know how to protect his family. The kids are confused. They don't have any idea what's going on. Nobody really understands this. Jesus is supposed to, I thought, make things better. I don't really know how this affects my life. They're scared. They're in hiding. Imagine that you could walk up to them and tell them about the crosses all over their city that represent Jesus. That one day, there will come a day where nobody worships Jupiter anymore. Nobody worships Diana anymore. That all over their city, there will be crosses. That the temples that they've built will become tourist attractions. And that people will come to visit Nero's circus. It wasn't really a circus, it was this kind of arena, but they would come to visit where Nero's circus was. But they wouldn't come for Nero's circus, they would come because it's now a cathedral honoring St. Peter. Can you imagine what they would have thought? How crazy they would have thought you were? Nero is forever. Jupiter is forever. They're going to kill us all off. And yet today, all over Rome, things are different because Jesus didn't call his followers Christians. He called them something different. And they took it so seriously that it completely changed the world. Now when you go to Rome, you will find crosses all over the place. Almost every rooftop has a cross on it. All over the place. This is in a walkway. Even the walkways have the little crosses on them. This next one, I love this. This is actually in the Colosseum where Nero used to sit. Now there's a cross representing Jesus Christ. Go to the next one. This is this little cross, if you can kind of see it, sometimes it may be a little hard to see. It's right in the middle of the gateway there. That cross is actually right in the entranceway where they used to lead the Christians in to their death in the Colosseum. Now there's a cross representing Jesus. How? How does something like this happen? How does this go from complete Roman domination and a guy that they killed to crosses everywhere? It's because the followers of Jesus, the followers of the way, took his words seriously. They didn't settle for being Christian. And it changed the world. So what did Jesus call his followers? That's what I want to explore this morning. We find it in a little passage of the Bible that we call the Sermon on the Mount, because Jesus was on the side of a hill when he gave it. A mount, Sermon on the Mount. We're a real creative bunch. So, if you have a Bible with you, know where that is. It's in the book of Matthew, chapter 5. If you don't have a Bible, there are some Bibles for free in the back there. You can feel free to grab one. There's lots of free apps on your phone or other digital device. You can grab one. Matthew's towards the back. If you start flipping towards the back, you'll find Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Those are really kind of big books in the back. We're going to be in that first one, Matthew. Chapters are the big numbers, verses are the little numbers. And if you take a little longer to find it, that's okay. We'll put them up on the screens to help out. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to find out just what Jesus said about his followers. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. So imagine this for a moment. The crowds have come to see this Jesus that they've heard about. This guy has done incredible miracles. People have talked about his teaching and how powerful it is, the authority that he speaks with. And so imagine that you had heard that and you get the opportunity to go see him speak in person. Can you imagine the anticipation that's building as the crowd gathers around and all of a sudden here's the man. And he's getting ready to speak and a hush comes over the crowds. And this is what he says. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Can you imagine being in that crowd and hearing him say this? Blessed are the poor? Are you kidding me? Blessed are the peacemakers. You know what happens to people who try and keep peace in Rome? Who go up against the government with peace as their weapon? Blessed are those who are persecuted. Wait a minute. You know what persecuted means? It doesn't mean you get bullied a little bit. It doesn't mean somebody hurt your feelings. Persecuted in ancient Rome meant mocked, tortured, killed. That's blessed. The crowd's got to be shocked. I can imagine the people sitting around going, maybe he'll do a miracle or something, because this speech kind of sucks. And before you get offended at me saying that the speech kind of sucks, that what Jesus said kind of sucks, let me recap here for a moment. This is what Jesus says we are: poor, sad, meek, righteous, merciful, pure, peaceful, persecuted, insulted people waiting for a reward in heaven. The good life. People have to think he's crazy. And yet 300 years later, within 300 years, the message of Jesus is everywhere. There are crosses all over Rome. But Jesus realizes that that's a lot to remember, so he gives them a word picture. He gives them kind of like a story. It's not quite as detailed as some of his parables, his other stories, but if you've been here over the last several weeks, you've heard one of our other speakers, Brian Daniel, talk about how Jesus used to take something physical, a physical reality, and he would use that to explain or to tell about a spiritual truth. And so that's what Jesus is going to do. He's going to take something physical and teach something spiritual. So let's go to the next verse, verse 13. He says, you, his followers, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. See, everybody at that time knew what salt was, because they didn't have refrigeration. They're out in the middle of the desert. They don't have ice boxes. They have no other way to preserve meat. Salt was very, very valuable to them, and they knew it was a preservative. So what is a preservative? Well, we've got this go to our graphic for the thing. We've got this periodic table. We've been talking about this there we go. Elemental is our series. Today's element is salt. We're doing this periodic table, so I thought we'd get a little scientific for those of you who don't remember your chemistry. This is a preservative. A substance added to food or wood or all kinds of other things I didn't have time to list to prevent decomposition due to chemical change or bacterial action. When there is no preservative, things decompose. When there's no preservative, things rot. You ever been around decomposing and rotting anything? It stinks. It's miserable. Especially in the Middle East in the first century. Can you imagine the heat of the desert, smelling things decompose and rot? Jesus is saying, look, you are the salt of the earth. You are the preservative of the earth. Without you, the earth rots. Without you, things are going to stink. You think things are bad now? Give up. See how bad it gets. They lived in a world far different than we live in America. Their normal was far different from our normal. Even today, as we look around the world And we see things like slavery. We see things like sex trafficking. We see things like entire villages being slaughtered for whatever purposes people have. And we look at that and we think, how could anybody? Look at the injustice. How could somebody treat another human being that way? The truth is, they see the world differently than we do. They don't see things through the same lens we do. Certainly in first century Israel, in the Middle East and they saw the world differently. Human life didn't have the value that we assign to it. We assign value to it because we've been taught that way. And it actually started, it's a viewpoint that started with Jesus. It started for us when Jesus taught his disciples how to pray, and he said the words, "Our Father." Because suddenly gods went from these distant beings that liked to toy with humans and demanded blood sacrifices so that maybe they would benefit you, to a personal God who cares about you, who is like a father, who loves you, who assigns value to you in spite of the things that you do wrong. And that means it's important how I treat you. Because if God values you, then I better value you too. And Jesus talked about this later. We saw it kind of in that kids video. Jesus said this later, that people will know that you are my followers because of your love. Remember that. We'll come back to that. So how do people know that you are a Christian? Do they know because you tell them? Or do they recognize it by the way you live? It's a tough question because, again, how do you define Christian? What is the way that you live that shows that you're a Christian? Well, some cultures have started to change and assign value to human life because Jesus' followers took it seriously when he said the way you're to live is as a preserver. You preserve life. You preserve individual value. You preserve through love. Jesus said it this way again. He said, "A new command I give you." They had all kinds of laws and commands. And Jesus was saying, look, this is what I want you to remember. A new command: love one another as I have loved you. That's important. As I have loved you. Because he said this right after he finished washing their feet, taking the job of a servant with his followers. He said this to his disciples right after he washed their feet, and within 24 hours, they would see him put on trial and beaten and spit on and mocked and eventually killed. And he says, "As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples, if you love one another." And then he went and died. He says, this is what it's going to look like when you preserve. You think of others before you think of yourself. And then he gives another picture. Verse 14. He says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." Remember the part of the world that they're living in. It's kind of like Nebraska, just without the green. There's long stretches of flat, and then a bunch of hills. And then long stretches of flat and a bunch of hills. And a bunch of very reflective sand. So when there's a town on a hill, you can see it at night for miles. The lamps that were lit, the lights that were around the city, you could see it for miles. It gave people direction. It showed them where to go. It gave people hope in the middle of the night because they could see that refuge in the distance. He says you can't hide that. He says in this translation it says a town built on a hill. The Greek there is very intentional. It's like to be appointed or to be set on a hill. It's strategic. He's saying it's like a strategic outpost in the distance that gives hope to a traveler. You can't hide that. It's on purpose. It's like oil lamps that they used in their homes. He said you put a lamp on its stand. You don't cover it. Back in that time, they wouldn't have had lights in every room. They wouldn't have had candles in every room. They would have had lamps. And if you put it in just the right spot, because they didn't have big sprawling houses like we do, you put it in just the right spot, and at night it lights up the whole house. But you got to get it in the right spot. It's strategic. Jesus was saying that you, if you are his follower, you are a strategically placed light. You provide hope in the distance. You provide light in the darkness. I don't know where you're coming from this morning as a follower. Maybe you're not a follower, and this part isn't for you. But if you are, there may be some of you that are saying, yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'm not a strategically placed light. I'm not strategically placed here. I got a new job, and it just happened to bring me here. I got relocated, or I moved here with this guy or girl, and now they're not even part of the picture. I'm just trying to get back home. I don't even really want to be here. I'm not strategically placed. I got one of the classes that I wanted to this semester, but that was it. Now I'm stuck in a whole bunch of classes that I don't really care about with people that I don't even like. Really just feel like dropping out. I'm not strategically placed. The temp agency put me here. I don't plan on sticking around long. It's just a placeholder. I'm just trying to get my foot in the door so I can move on to the next thing. I'm not even where I want to be yet. And Jesus says, no. If you're my follower, if you want to be something more than Christian, you are strategically placed. You may not understand it right now, but you have been strategically placed. You're in this spot at this time for a purpose. You may not understand it. I'm not saying that what may seem to be a problem to you, I'm not saying God caused it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, I don't know. But I am saying that as a light, as a strategically placed light, God says that you have a purpose right where you are. And then he goes on to say what that purpose is in verse 16. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and think, dang, that's a good Christian. I like that guy. Oh, no. Sorry, that was from the Joey version. That's what I want it to say. What he says, let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. He's saying, look, this isn't about being a good person. This isn't about people saying nice things about you when you die. Oh, he was such a nice guy. I like that guy. I wish I hung out with him more. It's not what it's about. It's not about being good enough that other people kind of like you. He says your deeds should be extraordinary. Not good, extraordinary. You ought to be living so differently that when people see the way you do things, they start to connect the dots. You know, that guy said something about Jesus. That's the only explanation for something like that, because that's stupid. You see how nice that guy is? That's like not a nice guy. That's like stupid nice. Nobody gives away that kind of money. Nobody would just drop everything on their plate to do that for someone else. Why would anybody live that way? That's dumb. Sometimes they may not connect the dots, and you have to help connect the dots for them. You know, I just believe that that's what I'm called to do. I think this is what Jesus would have done for you. because I know He loves you, and if He loves you, I love you. Yeah, I know it's going to cost me quite a bit, but if I can help, I think that's what Jesus would do. Sometimes you have to connect the dots, but He wants your deeds to be extraordinary. If you're anything like me, you may be at this point right now. I had a point in my life. I still have this point occasionally in my life that maybe you're saying, that sounds good, but I don't want that. I don't want to be salt and light. I prayed the magic prayer. I just want to go to heaven when I die because somebody told me about the other place. That doesn't sound good. I just want to go to heaven when I die. I want to be a good person, take care of my business, mind my own. You do you, I'll do me. It's all good. I just want to get through life. I think Jesus would say, I don't know who told you that. That's not what I called you to be. I didn't ask you to be Christian. I didn't ask you to just be a good person and get through life. I asked you to be salt. I asked you to be light. If you're going to be my follower, better get after it. And the first century Christians, the first century followers, they got after it. They got after the good deeds. They went and picked up discarded children. Again, value for human life, not really existent. They went and they found the orphans and they took them in and raised them in their homes, even though they already had kids of their own, even though it was already hard to make ends meet, even though it put pressure on their family, they took them in. When people got sick, they would take them to the pagan priests, and the pagan priests would then be the first ones to know when there was an outbreak of something, because the sick always came to them first. And guess who was the first to leave when an outbreak happened? The pagan priests, because they knew about it first. Like, honey, pack it up. Let's get out of here. This doesn't look good. But Jesus followers, they stayed, and they nursed the sick people, and they took care of them. Sometimes to the point of getting sick themselves and dying right alongside of them. And suddenly, people started to notice, these guys are nice. But not just nice, they're stupid nice. And they also noticed, they're not afraid to die. And light bulbs started going off. Because this message that these people talked about was about a resurrected Jesus. Hope for an eternal life. That this time here on earth isn't all there is. It's not the end of the story. And people started to connect the dots. They lived in a way that the Roman, Greek, pagans, all of them started to connect the dots. And it changed the world. Forever. And you go, yeah, that's a big task. Well, let me make it a little bit smaller for you for a moment. What is your world? What is your world? You may not be called to another country, but what is your world? You are called, you are meant as a follower of Jesus. And again, if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, I get that. But if you are meant to be salt and light in that job, or on that team, or with those friends, or in your family. And I get, you may say, I'm just a freshman. I'm just the new guy. I have no authority. I just started here. I have no influence. My family doesn't even listen to me. But here's a little phrase I ripped off from Andy Stanley. Salt always preserves. Light always illuminates. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you think can be done. It doesn't matter the influence you think you have. Salt always preserves, and light always illuminates. Even when everybody else does something that you know is not right. That's just the way they do business here. No. It's not the way I do business. I'd rather lose my job. What? That's stupid. Salt always preserves. Even if you're the only one and they make fun of you and they give you a bad time, chances are they're guilty. You ever put salt in a wound? They're probably just mad. Even when it seems like it's making no difference at all, you keep on making an extraordinary effort, doing extraordinary good deeds, because salt always preserves, even when you can't see it working. And you are salt. We're told this in our culture, in American culture at least, from the time that we're young. People tell us, you can change the world. Somewhere we grow out of that. You think, it's a fun thought when you're a kid. For some people, maybe it comes true, but I'm a 9-to-5 guy now. I just go do my thing and go home, and it is what it is. It seems so impossible. I can't even figure out this new computer system at work. Change the world. You kidding me? I'm busy trying to figure out what dinner I can cook for a picky kid. or I'm busy trying to get that perfect selfie for Instagram. Trying to... I know y'all do it. I've seen your pictures. Nobody just accidentally caught you that way. I know that took some time. I just want to be Christian and do good things and go to heaven when I die. I was listening to this podcast yesterday while I was doing some dishes at the house. This guy named Francis Chan, he's a pastor. He used to be a pastor of a megachurch in California. Phenomenal heart, amazing guy. And he was talking about how sometimes he thinks we take the term Holy Spirit a little bit too casually. That when we talk about the Spirit of God, we discuss it a little too casually. So I want to give some power back to that for a moment. In 1 Corinthians, and another one of the letters in the Bible, it says this guy named Paul, he's one of the writers. He's a follower of Jesus who didn't used to be a follower of Jesus, and he's writing to a church in Corinth, and he's talking about spiritual gifts, the things that God has gifted us to use for His glory. And this is what he says. He says, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. And then he says this, now to each one, notice that, each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. I could go on through the rest of these verses and start a whole nother sermon, but for your sake, I won't. But if you've tuned me out, I want you to come back for a moment. This is important. I want you to hear this. The power of the Spirit of the God who created the universe can live inside of you. If you call yourself a follower of Jesus, if you believe and you've chosen to give your life to Him, that power lives in you today. Can you imagine that? Do you realize how incredible that is? Do you realize what's inside of you right this minute? You are capable of so much more than you think you are. And it's not to make your life better. It's not to make your temporary time here on earth better. That's not what He gives you for. Sometimes I think that's why we miss out on the power of the Spirit, because we think somewhere in our minds, I'm going to speak for myself, I'm not going to speak for you for a moment, I'm going to speak for myself, that power means that I ought to be able to have things go better. That things ought to work out if I'm doing things the right way because I got that power of that Spirit in me. That's not what it's for. He says specifically, it is given for the common good. It's meant to be used. Every single one of you has a gift. And through the power of the Spirit, you can use that gift to share it for the common good. And how you do that is going to be unique to you. It's going to be unique to your personality, to the place that God has strategically put you in this moment. Even though you may be in a different place 6 months from now, that place you are right now is a place where you can use your gift by the power of the God who created everything if you view yourself as salt and light. I stand up here on a Sunday like this, or I stand up and lead worship, not because I'm a better Christian, not because I deserve attention. As a matter of fact, it was fun listening to Francis Chan, this guy that used to speak at a megachurch, talk about how part of the reason that he left was because he too often heard his name mentioned more than God. And it frustrated him. I don't stand up here because I deserve attention. I stand up here simply because this is the way God has designed me. He's given me a gift for public speaking. Not everybody has that gift. And I've worked to refine my skills so that I can get better at using my gift. But me alone by myself, ask the people who know me well, I am a very, very incomplete picture of the kingdom of Jesus. I'm trying to become more Christ-like, but I got a long way to go. You can put a few more O's in there, a long way to go. I am very, very incomplete. There are so many others needed in order to be a complete witness to the world around us. That also means that if you don't use your gift, if you don't recognize the power, if you choose to just be Christian instead of salt and light, something's missing. Something's going to be missing from the picture. You are needed. You are meant to share your gift. Jesus said, if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? You need to use your gift. I shared this with the praise team this morning. I said I wasn't going to probably share this story, but I'm going to share this story anyway. This Francis Chan, this teacher, was talking about a trip to India. He'd been to a few different countries after he left his megachurch, and he said he was just blown away by the Christians that he encountered on these trips. How hard they worked, how faithful they were, how all in. He said every one of them that he met was just 100% on fire and all in. They couldn't do anything but talk about the difference the gospel had made in their life. They worked so hard. And then they hosted people in their homes, and they taught, and they read, and they worked together, and they did things for others. They lived, he said, in this extraordinary way, that people saw their good deeds and glorified God because of it. And he finally talked to this guy in India and said, you know, everybody that I've come across has been so all in. He said, I'm sure I just haven't met them. Where are the Christians that just kind of get by? I mean, do you have those people that come to your church and they call themselves Christians, but they don't really, like, it doesn't make any difference during the week? And the guy from India looked at him and said, who would do that? How could somebody do that? He goes, I know you're American, but, excuse me, he said, do you understand that when somebody gets baptized here, they lose their job, they're cut off from their family, several of them have to go into hiding, they can't openly talk about their faith for fear of dying? He said, that's not a choice you make lightly. You don't give all that up unless you're all in. So let's not settle for Christian. Let's not settle for a little thing on our Facebook page that says our religious views is Christian, but our feed looks exactly like everybody else's. Our schedule, our time, the way we spend our money, the way we talk, the way we live looks just like everybody else. Jesus said that we are salt and light, every single one of us. If you are a follower of Jesus, you are salt and light. When early followers took that seriously, God changed the world. Crosses all over Rome. 2,000 years later, here we sit talking about it. Can you imagine what God might do today if we started taking that seriously? It's fun to think about. Let's pray. Our Father, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sending your Son to explain this thing to us. God, I don't know what it is inside of me that makes me get this wrong all the time. But God, I'm sure I'm not the only one. So I pray in this moment that anybody sitting here in this room, first and foremost, who has not chosen to make you Lord of their life, excuse me. God, I pray that you would speak to their heart right now. It's amazing that you would value us so much, that you would be so personal as to speak to each of us. But I pray you would do that right now. If that is you in this room, you have the opportunity right now to just say, God, I'm sorry. I know I've done things. I know I've lived my own way, but it's not working out. I believe in you. I want to live for you. Please show me how. God, for anybody who is speaking that to you right now, I pray that this moment is a moment of change in their life. Not that everything instantly goes to beautiful and perfect, because we know that's not the way it works, but that you would begin to change them from the inside out. God, for the rest of us who have made that decision at some point in the past, we know that that's a daily decision. That it's so easy in our culture to fall into just being Christian. God, break us of that this morning, will you please? Remind us of who you created us to be and what we can accomplish through the power of your Spirit living in us. God, I pray right now that this group of people this morning, I know there are people gathered all over the world, but I pray specifically for this group of people, that in that job, in that class, on that team, with those friends, in that family, whatever circumstances you have strategically placed each of us in, that you would open our eyes to your power, to what you want from us, from what you desire of us, and make us salt and light to your glory. I pray this in Jesus' name this morning. Amen.